Here is a quick and simple introduction to Photoshop that I used a couple of days ago with one of my students, and it seemed like a really good way of getting into Photoshop. She'd taken this photograph. She'd seen an image on the internet somewhere where the photograph had been turned black and white, but just the eyes had been left in colour. So she wanted to try and reproduce that effect, and I thought, brilliant way of getting into learning about layers, selections, masks, all sorts of basic stuff in Photoshop that I could teach her through this little project idea that she had. And in fact, it's a project idea that lots of my students have used in the past. You can take, say, a photograph of an urban street scene and just turn the letterboxes back to colour, or the buses or the taxis or whatever, or a scene in the country where you maybe the sky is black and white, but some other features are in colour. It's a really neat little project, so I'm just going to do a quick demonstration of this. I'm working on a Macintosh, but Photoshop works just as well on a PC. The keyboard shortcuts are maybe a little different. And I'm going to show a little bit about keyboard shortcuts because I think they're a really powerful way of learning Photoshop, getting an idea of this sort of ABC that will get you around the interface. I could open the program by going into my applications, or maybe I would have it already on my taskbar in a Macintosh. But I'm just going to show you this because it's so cool. The very latest version of the Mac OS has now got Siri built in. So I'm just going to go in, open Photoshop CC. There you go. How cool is that? And here, look, I've got an open dialog box. And after most of these dialogues in the menus, you'll get the keyboard shortcut. So if you begin to learn these, it just speeds up your workflow a huge amount. So I could go Command and O, or just click here on Open, and I'm going to go into that image and open it up. Actually, I'm going to show you also a different way on a Macintosh. I'm not sure this works on Windows. If I go Command or Control and W to close that image down, let's just hide that a moment. I can take the image here, click on it, and drop it straight into Photoshop, and it will open. Oh look, I've got my palette on this side. The first thing to note is this tool palette. And most of the palettes, if not all the palettes in Photoshop, are floating palettes. And you can switch them on and off here in the window by ticking on them. And sometimes my students are confused because someone say switch the tool palette off, and it's just a case of getting in there and switching it back on again. And if you hover over any of these tools, it's going to give you the shortcut. So V for move, M for marquee, L for lasso. And if you actually click on the tool, once you've hovered over it, it should also give you the sub-menus in there. But for some reason, there we go. I'm getting the sub-menus with a click. The clicking on this new Mac is a little bit interesting. I'm just getting used to it. Okay, it's also a very non-destructive program in that I can make changes using masks and effects down here which don't actually affect the original image, so that I can always go back to that original image and it will just put the effects as layers on top. But I still always get my students to take their first image and duplicate that layer so that they're working not on the original image and they can go back. You can do this by going into the layer palette and just going duplicate layer, or you can use the shortcut, which isn't Command or Control and D as you would expect, because that's the command for deselect. It's Command and Control or J will duplicate that layer. And in fact, I'm going to do it twice because I want to make a black and white copy here. Turning this black and white, again, there's a number of ways I could desaturate it. I could go into Image and into Adjustments, and I could go to the hue and saturation here, or with a lot more control I can go into the black and white here and get up a dialog box like this, which will give me the channels, the red, the yellow, the green, the cyan, and I can make adjustments here. Or alternatively, I can go into the adjustment layers, and I've got the same set of menus here. I can go into black and white. This time, rather than actually working on the layer, I'm working on an adjustment layer above it. So again, it's just a way of Photoshop being very indestructive of your images. So I'm just going to turn down the reds and the yellows to give a much more startling effect there. And also I'm going to change the levels to make the image a bit brighter. I could go into Command and L to get to the levels. I could go into the image adjustments and go to the levels here. Or, as before, I could go into an adjustment layer and get to the levels here. And I'm just going to pull the white balance right up like that to make the image much more bright. There we go. Now I'm going to, if I'm satisfied with that, click on the two adjustments and the layer below it, and then merge these. And the shortcut command for that is Command and E. So it's basically here, Command or Control and E is merge layers. So I'm going to bring them down into one. Now I'm going to put a mask on here, and I could go over here onto my polygon lasso, which is sort of a bit like a pair of scissors, and I could chop round this mask like that, as with a pair of scissors. When I double click at the end, it's made this selection. And I could then go into another new tool. This came out this summer, the Select and Mask tool. It used to be called Refine Mask, but it's now called the Select and Mask. And I can change some of the boundaries in here to get just to put a feathered edge on here to smooth it out a bit. And I can go and make that directly into a layer mask like that, except that I've got it the wrong way round. I actually wanted it the other way round. So let's just go back one. I'm going to use Command and Z, or Control and Z. I want to make the inverse selection. So I can either go Select and Inverse, or use this shortcut, which is Shift Command and I, or Shift Control and I. That will give me the inverse selection. And then again, if I go into Select and Mask, you'll see that the mask is just on the eye there. Again, if I go into Layer Mask here and go OK, that will have masked off just that eye. What I'm going to do now is just show you a different way of putting a mask on, which is just to paint directly onto this mask layer using a paintbrush. So I'm going to go over to here to the paintbrush, and I've got the colours here. I can actually swap the foreground and background colours around using the X key, which is really quick and useful. And everywhere I paint on this layer in black, it's going to create a mask. And everywhere where I paint in white, it's going to remove that mask again. So this is a really good way of getting people who are new to Photoshop into the idea of painting a mask on, and there's a lot of control in that. I could even zoom in using the Control and Command and Plus, so that I can get a little bit more accuracy in my painting, and I can change the size of the brush using the brackets key, the square brackets, so I could get right into the corners here and paint right over everywhere where I want the colour to show. Command or Control and 0 will take me right back again. I could even maybe swap the mask over here, and I can go back and just tidy up that selection that I made. It is very much like using a paintbrush, and it is very intuitive if you're a painter. Okay, so that's a pretty good mask I've made there, and it's shown the colour from below. My student wanted to make those eyes much more intense, so I'm just going to show you a way of making another powerful tool in Photoshop, which is having layers that interact with each other in different modes. So I'm actually going to create a new layer here above, between these two layers, between the coloured one and the black and white, and I'm going to click on the colour to select quite a startling sort of green, and then again back to my paintbrush. B for brush is the shortcut. I could use my brackets to make it a little bit bigger. There's all sorts of control I can get with the brush as to what shape it is and how the brush actually reacts, the opacity of the brush, all sorts of things. But at the moment I'm just using it just as it is to paint in those images, painting those eyes there. But here I'm going to change the mode of this layer down to multiply, and also change the opacity of it down just a little bit. There we go. So that's made the colour a little bit startling. And that's it really. I suppose what we could do here on this layer is just get an eraser, E for eraser, and I'm going to cut the brush right down to size and just plunk in that highlight again, just to make it a little bit more. So that's a very, very quick introduction to Photoshop, to some of the tools and to the shortcuts to get to those tools, to using layers and how the layers react together in different modes, to using masking layers, and down here to using adjustment layers. And a great fun little project that will get students started on Photoshop.